A little tidbit, we've been referring to the Thorn as the HMS Thorn. Chrome Bachbaroff in a recent video said that the use of HMS in the 1800s was incorrect, that happened much later on. And again, if you look at this National Maritime Museum draft, it's Majesty's sloop fly. There's no H. The H is in common letters. So we're going to refer to the Thorn as MS going forward, so as not to perpetuate the error. Now we're coming to some of the more interesting parts where we have to model the scroll and the drift ends, and of course very intimidating at first glance, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that we could cut these pieces out and in fact they would be relatively simple. So we have two almost identical pieces on either side, so we need 4 of these, and we'll need 4 of these. And then this little downturn on the drift, you could bend that, but it'd be much easier to in fact just carve out the end as is suggested in the book. That means we need to make up some blocks, and we're making up 3 blocks, one 12 inches thick, one 8 inches thick, and one 6 inches thick. And then we use some pre-made up circles to mark the pieces. The drift rail is 4 inches wide and 2 1/4 inches deep. Onto the Jim Barnes desktop sander, and using that little square to make sure I keep the piece absolutely square to the sander. Otherwise I'm going to get an angled cut which will ruin the piece. So you use whatever technique you think will give you a perfect cut. Of course, I left lots of space for me to take it down, the final cut by hand. It's just so easy to make a mistake when you're using power tools and power sanders. As a guide, I mark the 4-inch on the piece, which again just helps me double check and make sure I don't make an error. And sometimes I'll pencil off the piece I want to cut again to prevent errors. Now I move over to the Jim Barnes table saw, and I take the bulk of it down, leaving 4 inches. And then once one side is complete, I cut a nice clean line, and then flip it over to the other side and cut the same line on the opposite side of the piece, which leaves us with the 4 inches, the actual end thickness that we want to achieve. Of course, when you cut it on the table saw, it leaves a little extra piece for you to cut. So you can do this on the bandsaw or on a scroll saw, or you can simply sand it down. Just be real careful when you're doing it. And you're going to see lots of filing as I bring the piece down, and again using the caliper to check the thickness. Again, it's very easy to make a mistake, and I actually make a full extra piece so that if I do make a mistake, I don't have to do this setup all over again. And now we're going to carve in the scroll, and I'm going to use the turbo carver for this. For those of you who have never used one, you're missing half your life. It really is a fantastic tool. It allows you to almost paint with a sander. I'm using a diamond bit here that's tapered on the end. So again, you can take off thousandths of an inch at a time. Really just a fantastic tool to do this fine work. So as you can see, I've made a lot of stock because I knew this would not be easy. When I get the 4 done, I'll probably just post them on the Model Ship World site because it's could be a week before I get at the quality I want. In a recent conversation with Tony, she says that she actually uses a lathe. So I tried it out to make the drift scraper, and it really was very easy. The only addition I made was a little help I got from one of my jeweler channels on YouTube, which is to use beeswax to lubricate the wheel. And once I did this, there's a lot less cutting coming off of the wheel onto the piece. Another little tidbit or piece of magic is, we were complaining about the thickness of these cutting wheels. Well, you can reduce the thickness by either grinding it down with a stone or using another cutting wheel simply to rub it against it and reduce the size. And that reduces the thickness of the cutting wheel. So now we're going to try and cut this without breaking the end. And start from here and back, very gentle. I'm not sure if you can see it, but it certainly got the required curve. As you know from my videos, I'm constantly looking for better ways to do things, and one of the problems we all face is how do we hold the blank wood while scraping a thin piece. And this vise turned out to be the best simply because of the length, so it holds it, and I can, oops, almost put the wrong piece on, and I can go along and there's no bending. The piece is supported all along its entire length and really make a much better molding. Perfect. And I can just turn it over and do the other side. And we can just take a look at that. Quite happy with that. And this is the molding that you might be able to see. And then this is that little bend, which again we're going to put the molding, the scraper on it, and we'll probably we will use the turbo carver again to carve that little piece there, because the grain is going the wrong way. So here we are. I've completed the 4 moldings, done lots of extra stock, and then did a little more research and found it's not 4 moldings. I probably have as many as 10 moldings to make for different parts of the boat. So lots of different scrapers still to be made. And then as I read some more, I realized that I'd gotten the sequence wrong, that I can't install the moldings until I decide whether I'm going to paint the top side of the ship. And to do that, I had to start doing a lot of practicing. I'm not an artist. In fact, I have difficulties drawing a straight line far less a curved line. So I went to the book, and it's fairly descriptive, excellent training source if you're like me, how to prepare for painting a ship's model. I'm going to leave you to read it. There's a lot here, and there's a lot on YouTube which will help you understand, if you're going to use acrylic paints like I am, how to prepare the model to use the acrylic so that you don't have an issue. So the first challenge was to make sure that I had everything I needed to do the paint job. I needed a primer, and then I needed the colors. The first and perhaps most important color is Prussian blue, which is what I'm going to paint the frieze on. To paint the designs, and I'm going to paint the simple designs. I am not going to paint any nymphs or waterfowls. That's well beyond my ability. I'm going to simply paint some of these scrolls and use the technique of having 3 paints to highlight and to give the piece some depth. And so I needed 3 other colors, obviously white. I was able to find some burnt sienna, and then some yellow ochre, which I had. In terms of preparing the model itself, I'll be sanding the white poly off and looking for any imperfections in it. And then I'm going to put some white gesso primer on it, so I get a nice clean color. And of course, I was preparing for this job, so I have a series of very good masking tapes of different sizes. In terms of paint brushes, I'm only going to use 2. This big wide one is really for putting the Prussian blue on the side. And this very fine one, which is a 000, is for making the scrolls. The next challenge is really to hone my skills in painting. And so what I did is I made a series of photocopies of the various scrolls in the book and practiced on these, which included this diagram. And it actually, the more you do this, the better it gets and the more real it gets. And learning the technique, particularly the technique for the scrolls. These are the 3D drawings that Greg had done, and really explains what I'm going to attempt to do. And I use that word guardedly. And this here is one of the plans I bought from the National Maritime Museum. It's of the HMS Fly. And it shows a little more aggressively what I'm attempting to do. As you see, I've colored it in. But it gives you a good feel for the challenge ahead of us. This has lots of nymphs and all sorts of strange things and flags. So you're not going to see that on my model. And the truth is, with the Thorn, we don't know what the painting was, what it was depicting. So we're just going to stick with these scrolls. This is the only image I've ever found of the Thorn. It was painted by George Owen. And if you look at the stern, you'll certainly see that there was painting of some sort, although it's not very clear. And here is another plan I got from the National Maritime Museum, also of the Fly, but in this case it shows no frieze. Very helpful in looking at the moldings and how the moldings were applied, but doesn't help with the painting. I actually have quite a few friends who are professional artists. In fact, one of them even offered to paint the model for me. And then I have to admit I was tempted. But then again, I wouldn't achieve anything. I wouldn't have learned anything. And are you scratch building if in fact you farm out things to various people? Is that a fully made scratch model? But I guess that's a topic for another video, and we're going to leave that alone for now. We're now going to put the second color on, and to do that I've decided to apply a primer or base coat, which is white gesso. It is recommended to be used on wood, which would create a good bond between the acrylic paint and the wooden base. It is a very thin version of acrylic, so it's very compatible, and I plan to put 2, maybe a third coat on. This is the first coat, and then lightly sand in between the coats. We are going to start the painting. So the first thing we're going to do is we have some 1000 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to just give it one final sand. This is the last opportunity we have to get rid of any blemishes, because we need as perfect as possible a surface so that when we go to paint those scrolls on, there are no bumps or scratches or scrapes. So you have a lovely smooth finish here now. All the lines are gone. And now, so we're going to mix the paint and the Prussian blue. You remember it's a bit thick, so we're going to mix it pretty good. And I'm going to add some water. In a perfect world, I would get a brand new tube, but this is all that's available here in Trinidad. So we're going to start. You'll notice I've changed the big paintbrush. The first one I had was too soft, so I got a stiffer brush. And if you find that you're getting lines in the paint, of course you can just water it down with some water, which take the lines out. It might mean you need to do an extra coat. You'll notice I'm disregarding some of the instructions David has in the book, which is not to come back. And that's not because I want to ignore his instructions. It's because this paint is a bit lumpy, and I want to make sure I spread it as even as possible. I'm going to get, my guess is I'm going to end up with 3 coats of paint. That's the 3rd coat on, so time to take the masking tape off and see what a good or bad job we've done. And I'd hoped for a bigger line there, but that's all right. And we'll do the stern. And I'm very happy with that. And now for the unveiling. So let's see how that comes out. Well, I have to say that's pretty damn good. One little tiny bit of smudging, which will easily clean up. And of course, when I put the molding on, really will clean up beautifully. This Tamiya tape is simply the best for giving you clean lines with no bleed back on. I highly recommend investing in a few different sizes of Tamiya. Time certainly has flown along, and it's time to bring this video to an end. So I'll see you in the next video when we look at my painting of the scrolls on the model. So until then, remember, keep modeling.